They're calling the police on me for trespassing on land I secretly own. Karen McKenzie just built an $8,000 fence around our Willow Creek Lake access. She's standing there with Officer Martinez demanding my arrest for threatening community safety. What would you do if your HOA president tried stealing your kid's fishing spot? Here's what Karen doesn't know. While she's been playing neighborhood dictator, I've been studying property law, and that land her fancy fence is sitting on, I just bought it from the state for $15,000. I'm watching her smug smile disappear as I hand Martinez my property deed. Her illegal fence is now trespassing on my land. Where are you watching from? Does your neighborhood have a Karen too? Because what I'm about to do next will turn her power trip into the most expensive mistake she's ever made. The taste of justice is about to get very, very sweet. My name's Jake Morrison, I'm 42, and I've been an electrical contractor in this town for 15 years. Divorced dad of 2 amazing kids. Emma's 14 and thinks she knows everything. Tyler's 11 and still believes I'm the smartest guy in the world. I'm trying to keep it that way as long as possible. We live in a Willow Creek subdivision, this planned community built around a natural lake back in 1994. 127 homes, mostly families, the kind of place where kids still ride bikes until dark and neighbors actually know each other's names. At least, it used to be that kind of place. I bought our house in 2012 using my grandfather's inheritance. Gramps was actually one of the original surveyors for this development. Spent months walking these woods with his transit and measuring tape, making sure everything was laid out just right. He always said this lake was the heart of the community. And that's why he made sure every family would have access to it. Every Saturday morning, for 11 years, we'd walk down that path to the water. Me with my tackle box, the kids with their juice boxes and whatever book they were reading that week. Summer meant swimming lessons, Emma doing cannonballs while Tyler practiced floating on his back. Fall meant fishing for bass and watching the leaves change. Winter meant ice skating when it got cold enough. That path wasn't just access to the lake, it was access to being a family. Then Karen McKenzie got elected HOA president. Picture the kind of person who counts your grass blades and times your garbage pickup to the minute. Silver bob haircut that never moves, even in wind, always carrying that leather-bound planner like it's the Constitution. Drives a white BMW SUV with, I kid you not, HOA board vanity plates. If pettiness had a poster child, Karen would be holding the Employee of the Month plaque. Her husband Brad's nice enough, but he's got that defeated look of a man who stopped arguing years ago. Just nods and retreats to his workshop whenever Karen starts planning her next community improvement campaign. Can't say I blame him. Karen's been president for 6 years running, mostly because nobody else wanted the headache, but somewhere along the way, she forgot she was supposed to serve the community, not rule it. Her favorite phrases are property values and maintaining standards, but what she really means is control. The first sign of trouble came last spring with her beautification campaign. Suddenly, specific houses needed mandatory landscaping improvements. Guess whose place got singled out for having a lake view obstruction? Namely, the tire swing my dad and I hung for the kids on the old oak tree. $500 fine for unapproved recreational equipment. I can still taste how my morning coffee turned bitter when she showed up at 7 a.m., clicking across my driveway in those sharp heels, waving that violation notice like a victory flag. I should have known then that this was just the beginning, but I paid the fine, took down the swing, and figured that would be the end of it. The sound of my kids asking, "Why can't we have our swing back, Dad?" should have been my wake-up call. That night, I started researching HOA bylaws. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but something told me Karen McKenzie was just getting started. 2 weeks after the swing incident, Karen called an emergency board meeting. And by emergency, I mean she sent out notices at 6 p.m. on a Friday for a Monday night meeting. Real emergencies don't wait for convenient scheduling, but apparently Karen's version of crisis management runs on banker's hours. The topic, safety concerns at the lake access point. I showed up to find Karen at the head of the community center table, flanked by her usual suspects, Cheryl the secretary taking notes like she's recording the Gettysburg Address, and Tom the treasurer looking like he'd rather be getting a root canal. About 12 other homeowners scattered around those uncomfortable metal folding chairs, the kind that squeak every time you shift your weight. Karen launched into this dramatic presentation about liability issues and insurance requirements. She'd even brought props, a manila folder full of what she claimed were official reports recommending we restrict unsupervised access to common water areas. "The insurance company is very clear," she announced, waving papers like evidence in a courtroom. "We need immediate safety barriers to protect the association from lawsuits." Here's where things got interesting. I raised my hand, polite as you please, and asked to see a copy of this insurance report. You know, the one that was supposedly so urgent it required an emergency meeting. Karen's perfectly applied lipstick tightened into a thin line. "The board will review all relevant documentation and make appropriate materials available after proper consideration." A translation: "How dare you question me, peasant? But I'm a contractor. I deal with insurance companies, safety regulations, and liability issues every day." So the next morning, I called our HOA's insurance provider directly. Took exactly 4 minutes to confirm what I suspected. No such report existed. No safety assessment, no new requirements, nothing. And that's when I really dove into those bylaws I'd been reading. Turns out Karen had violated at least 3 different rules with her little emergency meeting. HOA bylaws require 30 days notice for any changes to common areas. Emergency powers only apply to genuine hazards, burst pipes, storm damage, actual emergencies, not Karen's manufactured crises. But here's the beautiful part. I didn't just get mad. I got organized. I spent the next week going door to door with a simple survey. Not some official petition that might scare people, just a neighbor asking neighbors what they thought about restricting lake access. 89% opposed any restrictions. Even some of Karen's usual supporters started asking questions. The smell of fresh printer ink filled my garage as I made copies of everything: the survey results, the bylaw violations, photos of our kids safely enjoying the lake for over a decade. I documented everything with timestamps, witness statements, and cross-references that would make a paralegal proud. Karen's response was predictable. She dismissed all objections as troublemaking by a vocal minority and scheduled the official vote for the Tuesday after Labor Day weekend. You know, when half the families with kids would be squeezing in one last vacation before school started. She only forgot to notify about 20 homeowners about the rescheduled date. Funny how those 20 happened to be the ones who'd expressed concerns about her plan. The vote passed 3-1 with Tom abstaining, but Tom looked like he wanted to crawl under the table while he did it. Karen smiled that triumphant smile and announced that temporary safety barriers would be installed within the week. The taste of betrayal was bitter in my mouth as I watched our neighbors file out, most of them unaware they'd just been steamrolled by parliamentary procedure and selective communication. But I had documentation proving the meeting was improper. Every violation, every procedural shortcut, every convenient oversight was now part of an official record. As I walked home that night, my boots crunching on the gravel path I'd soon lose access to, I was already planning my next move. Karen thought she'd won. She had no idea the game was just beginning. Thursday morning, 6 a.m. sharp, I was 40 miles away on a job site, wrestling with a stubborn electrical panel, when my phone started buzzing with texts from neighbors. "Installation crew at the lake? They're putting up a fence. Where are you?" By the time I got home that afternoon, it was done. 8 feet of decorative wrought iron fencing stretching across what used to be our community path. Professional installation, concrete footings, the works. And right in the center, a single gate with a shiny new lock. The sign posted next to it made my blood pressure spike. "Lake access by appointment only. Contact HOA board for scheduling. 48-hour notice required." 48 hours notice to walk to a lake in my own neighborhood. Karen was watering her flower beds when I pulled into my driveway, humming some tune like she'd just won the lottery. She gave me this little finger wave, not friendly, more like a queen acknowledging a peasant. "Safety first, Jake," she called out sweetly. "I'm sure you understand." What I understood was that I needed to dig deeper. That night, after Emma and Tyler went to bed asking why they couldn't go fishing anymore, I drove to the county records office. You know that musty smell of old documents and industrial carpet? That's what determination smells like at 8 p.m. on a Thursday. The clerk was this patient older woman who probably dealt with frustrated homeowners every day. I explained what I needed: a original subdivision plat maps, anything showing the lake access designation. She disappeared into the basement archives and came back with a treasure trove. The original 1994 subdivision agreement was fascinating reading. My grandfather's surveyor notes were still attached, written in his careful engineer's handwriting. And there it was, clear as day. The lake access path was specifically designated as a permanent common area easement, not just a convenience, not just a privilege, a permanent legal right. But here's where it got interesting. Gramps had made detailed notes about negotiations with the original developer. The lake access wasn't just thrown in as an afterthought. It was a selling point, a promise made to every family who bought a house here. Natural lake access for all residents in perpetuity. Perpetuity. That's lawyer speak for forever, in case Karen needed a translation. I made copies of everything. 47 pages of legal documents, surveys, and correspondence. The next morning, I organized an emergency town hall meeting of my own, posted flyers on every door, sent emails, made phone calls. If Karen could call emergency meetings, so could I. 43 neighbors showed up. Biggest HOA gathering in years. I brought coffee and grocery store donuts. Nothing fancy, but the smell of fresh caffeine and sugar helped take the edge off everyone's frustration. I spread the original plat maps across 3 folding tables, pointing out the permanent easement designation. Jim Kowalski, retired police detective, sharp as a tack, started asking the kind of pointed questions that make lawyers nervous. "So this easement was part of every deed when we bought our houses?" Jim asked. "That's right, it's legally protected." And the HOA board just ignored that? Apparently so. Karen showed up halfway through, Brad trailing behind her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. She stood in the back with her arms crossed, that practiced smile getting tighter by the minute. When I finished presenting the evidence, she stepped forward. "The board has already made its decision based on proper legal consultation," she announced. "This meeting is irregular and has no standing." That's when Tom the treasurer did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He cleared his throat and said, "Actually, Karen, I don't remember seeing any legal consultation about permanent easements." You could have heard a pin drop. Tom had just contradicted the Queen in public. Karen's composure cracked just enough to reveal what was underneath. "Once property values stabilize, we can revisit this issue," she snapped. Then she caught herself, but it was too late. Property values stabilize. After what? I looked around the room and saw the same question in everyone's eyes. That's when Maria Santos, the 3rd grade teacher who lived 2 streets over, raised her hand. "Karen, are you planning to sell your house?" "That's none of anyone's business," Karen shot back, but her face had gone 3 shades paler. The meeting ended with more questions than answers, but I'd accomplished what I needed. The community was starting to see through Karen's safety justifications, and Tom, bless him, had shown there were cracks in the board's unity. As people filed out, Mrs. Chen, who'd lived here since the original development, pulled me aside. Her voice was quiet but firm. She asked me about selling 6 months ago, wanted to know if I'd consider a cash offer from a motivated buyer. Suddenly, Karen's campaign wasn't about rules or safety, it was about money. And if she was working with buyers or investors, that changed everything. If I thought Karen would back down after being exposed, I seriously underestimated her capacity for vindictive pettiness. Within a week of my town hall meeting, she launched what I can only describe as an intimidation campaign that would make a mob boss proud. First came the architectural review violations. My mailbox, the same basic black post-in box that had been there for 11 years, was suddenly non-conforming to community standards. Apparently, the HOA had quietly updated the approved mailbox specifications, and mine was now 3 inches too tall and the wrong shade of black. Then my driveway got cited for an oil stain that measured roughly the size of a quarter. Never mind that Brad McKenzie's driveway looked like a Jiffy Lube explosion, or that half the driveways in the neighborhood had similar marks from normal car maintenance. But Karen's real genius was in the whisper campaign. She started making casual comments to neighbors about my concerning behavior and aggressive attitude toward women in authority. Nothing actionable, nothing you could prove, just poison dripped into casual conversations at the mailbox. Maria Santos told me she'd overheard Karen at the grocery store suggesting that my association with troublemakers could affect other homeowners standing with the board. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery section apparently couldn't mask the stench of Karen's manipulation. So I decided to fight fire with facts. As a homeowner, I had the legal right to review HOA financial records. Most people don't know this, but every homeowner association is required to make their books available for inspection. It took 3 written requests and a threat to involve an attorney, but Karen finally, grudgingly provided access. What I found in those records was fascinating, and by fascinating I mean potentially criminal. $12,000 in landscaping improvements over the past year, all paid to McKenzie Contracting, Brad's company. No bids, no approvals from the general membership, just checks cut to the president's husband for vaguely described community enhancement projects. I spent a weekend mapping out every expense, cross-referencing with actual improvements visible in the neighborhood. The math didn't add up. Either Brad was the most expensive landscaper in the tri-state area, or someone was treating the HOA budget like their personal piggy bank. Jim Kowalski had been coming to board meetings, taking notes in that methodical cop way that makes guilty people sweat. When I showed him the financial discrepancies, his eyebrows went up. $12,000 for landscaping. Huh? He flipped through his meeting notes. I don't remember voting on any major landscape projects. That's because there weren't any votes. Karen approved them all as routine maintenance. Routine maintenance doesn't usually cost more than a decent used car. Meanwhile, the community was starting to organize itself. Maria had created a childcare co-op, which sounds innocent enough until you realize it meant parents were talking, sharing stories, comparing notes about Karen's behavior. Mrs. Chen started hosting coffee mornings, where longtime residents shared memories of what the neighborhood used to be like. These weren't protests or organized resistance, just neighbors being neighborly, but it was exactly the kind of thing that threatened Karen's control. Her response was predictable and petty. She called county code enforcement on my work truck, parked in my own driveway. The truck was legally parked, properly registered, no violations, but it forced me to take a day off work to deal with the inspector, who showed up looking apologetic and clearly annoyed at having his time wasted. "Ma'am, there's nothing wrong with this vehicle," he told Karen when she appeared to observe the inspection. "It's a work truck parked at the owner's residence, perfectly legal." That night, as I was helping Tyler with his math homework, he looked up at me with those serious 11-year-old eyes. "Dad, why can't we go fishing anymore?" How do you explain petty tyranny to a kid? How do you tell your son that some adults never outgrow playground bullying, they just get better at hiding it behind rules and procedures? "We'll figure it out, buddy," I promised. "Sometimes adults make things complicated, but we'll find a way." Emma, eavesdropping from the kitchen, chimed in with teenage directness. "It's because Mrs. McKenzie is being mean, right? Sarah's mom says she's trying to make people move away." Kids. They cut right through the nonsense and see the truth adults try to dress up in fancy language. That Saturday morning, I stood at the locked gate watching other families drive to parks and lakes 20 minutes away for activities we used to enjoy in our own backyard. The sound of that padlock clicking as I tested it one more time wasn't just frustrating, it was heartbreaking. But standing there, watching my kid's childhood being stolen by someone's power trip, I made a decision. This wasn't just about property rights anymore. This was about making sure Tyler and Emma grew up knowing that bullies don't always win, that sometimes the good guys fight back and actually succeed. I just needed to figure out how. Sometimes the most important discoveries happened at 2 a.m. when you're running on coffee fumes and stubborn determination. That's when I was hunched over my laptop, diving deeper into property records than any sane person should at that hour. The blue glow of the screen was giving me a headache, but I couldn't stop. Something about the original subdivision documents was nagging at me. I'd been cross-referencing the 1994 plat maps with current property tax records, looking for any leverage, any loophole, any technicality that might help our case. Most of it was standard stuff, lot lines, setbacks, utility easements, but then I noticed something odd about the lake access path itself. The parcel number didn't match. Every lot in Willow Creek had a clear parcel designation, tied to individual homeowners or the HOA. But the lake access path, the specific strip of land where Karen had installed her fence, had a different designation entirely. Not HOA property, not private property, something else. I pulled up the county assessor's database and started tracing that parcel number through decades of records. What I found made me sit back in my chair and whistle low enough not to wake the kids. The lake access path was built on a separate parcel that was never actually owned by the HOA. According to the records, the original developer, Willow Creek Properties, LLC, had retained ownership of that specific strip, along with a small section of shoreline and even a tiny island about 50 yards out. The plan, documented in a 1995 letter I found buried in the municipal files, was to eventually sell or donate the land to the city for a public park. But Willow Creek Properties went belly up during the 2008 financial crisis. When companies dissolve without properly disposing of assets, those assets revert to the state land bank, which meant that for the past 15 years, the land Karen was trying to control wasn't even hers to control. The fence she'd installed with such ceremony? It was sitting on state property, without permits, without permission. Technically, it was illegal. But here's the beautiful part, the part that made me actually laugh out loud at 2:47 a.m. while my neighbors slept peacefully in their beds. The state land bank sells these orphaned parcels to recover administrative costs, usually for pennies on the dollar. I found the listing buried on a government website that looked like it was designed in 1997. Parcel 47B101H MISC. 0.3 acres, includes 200 feet lakefront access and small island. Minimum bid, $15,000. $15,000 for the land that controlled access to our entire lake, for the strip of property that Karen thought she owned, thought she could fence off, thought she could use to manipulate an entire community. I had $18,000 in my small retirement account. Money I'd been saving for the kids' college, for emergencies, for someday. But what's more important than your children's right to grow up, free from petty tyrants? The bidding process was surprisingly straightforward. No complicated procedures, no political connections required. Just an application, a certified check, and a willingness to wait 6 weeks for bureaucratic wheels to turn. But I didn't stop there. If I was going to buy this land, I needed to understand everything about it. Environmental surveys, water rights, any restrictions or easements. I spent the next 3 days calling every relevant government office, learning more about wetland regulations and shoreline management than most people know in a lifetime. The environmental assessment alone was eye-opening. Karen's fence installation had damaged natural drainage patterns. The concrete footings were disrupting water flow, creating minor erosion issues that could become major problems. If anything, the fence was actually creating the safety hazards Karen claimed to be preventing. While I was researching, planning, and preparing, Karen was getting more desperate. Tom, the treasurer, had started asking uncomfortable questions about financial transparency. Maria's informal neighborhood network was growing stronger. Even some of Karen's traditional allies were beginning to express private doubts. But Karen still had no idea what was coming. As far as she knew, she held all the cards. She had the lock, she had the key, she had the authority. She was about to learn that authority without legitimacy is just bullying with paperwork. The irony was perfect. Karen thought she was securing her power by fencing off the lake. Instead, she'd given me the motivation and the roadmap to take that power away completely. Every great comeback has a moment when the underdog realizes they're not actually the underdog. This was mine. You know what they say about the best laid plans? Well, mine involved takeout Chinese food, way too much coffee, and a kitchen table covered in so many legal documents it looked like a law firm had exploded. First call was to my brother Mike, who's a real estate attorney up in Chicago. Picture this conversation happening at 6 a.m. on a Saturday while I'm standing in my kitchen in pajama pants, surrounded by property surveys. Mike, hypothetically, if someone wanted to buy state land bank property, how quickly could that happen? Hypothetically, or are you about to do something that's going to give mom heart palpitations? The second one. Mike laughed, but he walked me through the process. Application, environmental review, title search, closing. 6 to 8 weeks if everything went smoothly. The state wants these orphaned properties off their books, so they're motivated sellers. Next, I needed a team. Not some dramatic Ocean's 11 situation, just neighbors who were tired of Karen's nonsense and had specific skills I could use. Jim Kowalski was obvious. Retired detective, knows how to document evidence, understands legal procedures. Plus, he'd been taking notes at every board meeting, building what he called a pattern of behavior file on Karen's violations. Maria Santos brought the community organizing skills. Teachers know how to manage groups, communicate clearly, and get parents mobilized when needed. She'd already proven that with her informal neighborhood network. Mrs. Chen was my historical expert. She'd lived here since the original development, knew every family story, every broken promise, every change from what the neighborhood was supposed to be. In community fights, institutional memory is powerful ammunition. And surprisingly, Tom, the treasurer, had been quietly reaching out. Poor guy was clearly uncomfortable with Karen's financial shenanigans, but didn't know how to push back without getting steamrolled. He needed backup, and I needed inside information. We started meeting Tuesday nights at my kitchen table. The smell of General Tso's chicken and the sound of calculator keys clicking became the soundtrack of our rebellion. Mike handled the legal framework remotely, explaining the land purchase process and making sure we didn't miss any procedural requirements. Turns out buying state property requires environmental impact assessments, surveys, and title insurance, but it's all standard stuff if you know what you're doing. The key thing, Mike explained during one of our 7 a.m. phone calls, is documentation. The state wants to know you're not going to flip the property or cause environmental damage. Show them a solid plan for community benefit, and they'll fast-track your application. Jim was building the case for Karen's pattern of violations. HOA bylaws, state regulations, environmental permits. She'd cut corners everywhere. It's like watching someone rack up parking tickets while robbing a bank, he said, flipping through his files. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. Maria coordinated the community support strategy, not protests or confrontations, just making sure people knew what was really happening. Her teacher network was spreading the word to other neighborhoods dealing with similar HOA problems. Apparently, Karen-style tyrants are more common than you'd think. Mrs. Chen was documenting the original vision for our community. Letters from the developer, early homeowner meetings, promises made during sales presentations. They sold us a family neighborhood, she said, her voice firm despite her 70-plus years. Not some sterile investment property. The environmental survey was actually encouraging. The land was classified as enhanced recreational use property, perfect for community access. Karen's fence was the environmental problem, disrupting natural water drainage and damaging native plant communities. Our timeline was tight but manageable. Land purchase applications submitted by month end. Environmental permits for fence removal. Because yes, taking down an illegal fence on your own property still requires paperwork. Media strategy in case Karen tried to spin this as some kind of hostile takeover. The financial side was straightforward. My $18,000 retirement account would cover the land cost plus legal fees. Mike was handling the transaction pro bono because, as he put it, Karen McKenzie sounds like every HOA president I've ever wanted to see taken down a peg. But the most important part of our strategy was patience. Karen had no idea what was coming. She was still operating under the assumption that she controlled the situation, that her fence and her rules were permanent facts of neighborhood life. Let her keep thinking that. Every Tuesday night, as we cleaned up Chinese food containers and filed away another week's worth of preparation, I felt like we were building something bigger than just a property transaction. We were building a community that could stand up to bullies, that understood its rights, that wouldn't be intimidated by fancy titles and manufactured authority. The taste of sweet and sour sauce and the texture of legal documents under my fingers became the flavor and feel of hope. We were going to win this thing. We just had to be smarter, more patient, and more thorough than Karen had ever bothered to be. You know what the best part is? Maria said one night as we wrapped up. She's doing this to herself. Every violation, every shortcut, every abuse of power, it's all going to come back to bite her. Jim nodded, closing his evidence folder. In police work, we call that building your own case. Karen's been the prosecutor, judge, and jury for so long, she forgot other people might be keeping score. 6 weeks. We just had to keep our heads down and our documentation organized for 6 more weeks. 4 weeks into our land purchase process, Karen's paranoia radar started pinging. She couldn't figure out what we were up to, but she knew something was happening. The neighborhood felt different, more organized, more confident, less afraid of her disapproval. Her response was to double down on petty harassment with the dedication of someone who'd made tyranny their full-time job. My grass got measured with a ruler, not kidding. Karen showed up with an actual measuring device because my lawn was allegedly 3.1 inches tall and the HOA limit was 3 inches. She took photos of the ruler against individual grass blades like she was documenting a crime scene. "I'm just ensuring compliance," she announced to my neighbor Frank, who was washing his car and trying not to laugh. "Property values depend on consistent standards." But Frank's car was sitting in a puddle of soapy water running into the storm drain, and somehow that didn't merit measurement or documentation. Funny how Karen's eagle eye for violations was so selective. The real escalation came when she discovered I was up to something through her network of busybody informants. Cheryl, the secretary, had spotted me making multiple trips to the county office building. Someone else saw me having coffee with Jim Kowalski. Maria's increasing confidence at neighborhood gatherings was making Karen nervous. So Karen decided to get creative with sabotage. First, she filed an anonymous complaint about my business license, claiming I was running a commercial operation out of my house because my work truck was parked in the driveway. The city inspector who showed up looked embarrassed as he explained that someone had alleged I was operating an unlicensed electrical contracting business from my residence. "Sir, you're clearly licensed, your truck registration is current, and parking a work vehicle at your home isn't a violation of anything," he said, checking boxes on his clipboard with obvious reluctance. "I have to follow up on all complaints, but this is pretty clearly a neighbor dispute rather than a code issue." Karen watched from her kitchen window, probably disappointed that I wasn't being led away in handcuffs. Next, she tried to pressure Tom into approving an emergency assessment of $500 per household for enhanced community security measures. This was her attempt to squeeze money out of everyone while making it look like she was responding to some urgent threat. Tom, bless his heart, had finally found his backbone. "What kind of security threat requires a $63,500 emergency expenditure?" he asked during the board meeting, "and why wasn't this discussed with the community first?" "The board has discretionary authority for emergency expenditures," Karen snapped. "Actually," Jim Kowalski said from the audience, consulting his notes, "according to the bylaws, emergency expenditures over $10,000 require homeowner approval unless there's an immediate threat to life or property." What's the immediate threat here? You could practically see the steam coming out of Karen's ears. The threat is community disruption by individuals who refuse to respect proper authority. Translation: the threat was people asking inconvenient questions. But Karen's most vindictive move was calling my ex-wife. Sarah and I have been divorced for 3 years, but we co-parent pretty well. The kids go back and forth, we split expenses, we don't drag each other through unnecessary drama. So when Sarah called me, confused and concerned, I knew Karen had crossed a line. "Jake, I got this weird call from someone in your neighborhood," Sarah said. "She said there's been concerning neighborhood tensions and that it might not be a good environment for Emma and Tyler right now. What's going on?" I explained the HOA situation, the fence, Karen's escalating harassment. Sarah listened, then sighed. "So basically, your HOA president is trying to use our kids as leverage in her power trip. That's about the size of it. Yeah, that's not happening. The kids love that house, they love the lake, and they're not going anywhere because some woman is having a control freak meltdown." Sarah's support meant more than I'd expected. It also meant Karen had seriously miscalculated. Trying to weaponize custody concerns against a devoted father was the kind of overreach that makes enemies out of neutral parties. Meanwhile, my phone was buzzing constantly with updates from neighbors. Karen had approached Mrs. Patterson, our sweet 78-year-old neighbor who still bakes cookies for the mail carrier, with concerns about whether she could really maintain her property standards at her age. Mrs. Patterson's response, according to Maria, who witnessed it, was priceless. "Honey, I was maintaining property standards when you were still figuring out which end of a lawnmower was which. Mind your own business." Even some of Karen's traditional supporters were getting uncomfortable. Her escalating harassment was making everyone nervous about becoming targets themselves. The smell of fear was thick in the air during neighborhood encounters. Not fear of Karen's authority, but fear of her unpredictability. 3 weeks left on the land purchase timeline. Karen still had no idea what was really coming, but she could sense her control slipping. Desperate people make stupid mistakes, and Karen was definitely getting desperate. Every morning when I walked past that locked gate, hearing the metal fence post humming slightly in the wind, I felt like a runner in the final stretch of a marathon. The finish line was close enough to taste, and it tasted like sweet, sweet justice. 2 weeks before my land purchase closed, Karen went completely nuclear. I'm talking scorched earth, burn it all down, if I can't win, nobody can nuclear. It started with another emergency board meeting. This time, the alleged emergency was a credible security threat to the community. Karen had somehow convinced herself, or was pretending to believe, that the growing opposition to her leadership constituted actual danger. Recent activities by certain residents have created an atmosphere of hostility and potential violence, she announced to the 4 people who showed up to her hastily called meeting. For the safety of all homeowners, we need to implement enhanced security protocols. Enhanced security protocols turned out to mean banning me from all common areas, including the walking paths and mailbox cluster. According to Karen's new emergency powers resolution, I was now considered a trespassing threat if I set foot anywhere outside my own property line. Jim Kowalski, who'd been documenting everything, just shook his head. You can't ban a homeowner from common areas without due process, he said. This isn't legal, it's not enforceable, and it's definitely not smart. The board has emergency authority to protect community welfare, Karen shot back. The board has 3 members, and you're only one of them, Tom replied. He'd really found his courage over the past month. I never voted for this, and neither did Cheryl. That's when we learned that Cheryl had quietly resigned as secretary 2 days earlier. Apparently, even Karen's most loyal supporter had limits, and threatening to call police on neighbors for walking their dogs had crossed them. But Karen wasn't done. If she couldn't control the HOA legally, she'd control it through fear and intimidation. Anonymous flyers started appearing on doorsteps and car windshields. Professional printing, not some home computer job. Concerned neighbors alert. Resident under investigation for aggressive behavior and financial irregularities. No specific allegations, no sources, just enough innuendo to make people nervous. The flyer suggested that I was under investigation by authorities and that families should take appropriate precautions for their safety. Pure fiction, but designed to isolate me from community support. Maria found one stuck under her windshield wiper at the grocery store. This is insane, she texted me. She's literally making stuff up now. But Karen's most vindictive move was targeting the kids. She called Willow Creek Elementary, where Emma and Tyler went to school, suggesting that there were family stressors that might affect their safety and academic performance. She recommended that the school counselor check in with my children to ensure they weren't being negatively impacted by ongoing family instability. I found out about this when Emma came home from school, confused and upset. Dad, why did Mrs. Rodriguez want to talk to me about whether I felt safe at home? She asked. I told her you're the best dad ever, but she kept asking weird questions about stress and fighting. That's when I saw red. You can come after me, you can harass me, you can make my life difficult, but the moment you involve my children in your power games, you've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I called the school immediately and spoke with the principal, who was clearly uncomfortable about the whole situation. After I explained what was really happening, the HOA dispute, Karen's escalating harassment, the complete lack of any family problems, the counselor visits stopped. But the damage to my kids' sense of security was done. Tyler asked me that night if we were going to have to move because the mean lady doesn't want us here anymore. How do you explain to an 11-year-old that sometimes adults become so drunk on tiny amounts of power that they lose all perspective on what's actually important? Meanwhile, Karen was making one final push to change the neighborhood demographics before her authority evaporated completely. Mrs. Patterson told Maria that she'd received a generous cash offer from an unnamed investor who was looking to upgrade properties in transitioning neighborhoods. 3 other elderly homeowners had received similar contacts, all cash offers, all significantly above market value, all contingent on quick closings before market conditions changed. Karen was trying to flip the community composition in her favor, pushing out longtime residents and replacing them with people who'd be grateful for her strong leadership and property value protection. But her timing was terrible. The community was more unified against her than ever. People were sharing information, supporting each other, documenting every violation and overreach. Even Brad McKenzie looked embarrassed when he picked up their mail, avoiding eye contact with neighbors who used to be friends. The smell of autumn leaves burning in someone's backyard mixed with the bitter taste of anticipation as I counted down the days to closing, Karen's desperation was making her sloppy, vindictive, and increasingly isolated. She was playing a game where she thought she still held all the cards, not realizing that the deck had already been shuffled. 1 week left, 7 more days of Karen's emergency powers and manufactured authority. 7 more days of my kids asking why they couldn't play by the lake where their grandfather had taught me to fish decades ago. Then, the real emergency would begin, Karen's emergency, because she was about to discover that all her fences, all her locks, all her little kingdom of petty rules had been built on land that was never hers to control. And I was about to become the person holding the only key that mattered. Saturday morning, 9 a.m., the traditional community fishing time that Karen had tried so hard to kill. But this Saturday was different. This Saturday, 27 families showed up at the locked fence, despite Karen's threats, despite her emergency powers, despite her warnings about trespassing and police involvement. Word had spread through Maria's network, through Mrs. Chen's coffee mornings, through the simple fact that people were tired of being bullied in their own neighborhood. Parents brought fishing rods, kids brought bikes, grandparents brought folding chairs. It looked like a community picnic, except for the 8-foot iron fence blocking access to what should have been our shared space. The smell of fresh coffee from thermoses mixed with morning dew on the grass as neighbors gathered, chatting quietly, waiting to see what would happen next. I stood near the gate with my tackle box, just like any other Saturday for the past 11 years, except my heart was hammering and my mouth tasted like copper pennies. At 9:15, right on schedule, Karen arrived in her white BMW, followed by a police cruiser. She'd brought her brother-in-law, Officer Rick, who looked about as enthusiastic as someone attending their own root canal. And then, perfect timing, Channel 7's news van pulled up. The reporter was Jessica Chen, no relation to our Mrs. Chen, but she'd been following up on community interest stories. Something about neighborhood tensions over lake access had caught her attention. Karen strutted over to the crowd like she was about to conduct a mass arrest, her heels clicking on the asphalt with that sharp staccato that meant business. She had a manila folder clutched against her chest, probably more of her manufactured emergency documentation. "This is an illegal assembly on private property," she announced, loud enough for the news camera to pick up. "Officer Martinez, please inform these people they need to disperse immediately or face trespassing charges." Officer Martinez looked at the crowd of families with fishing poles and coffee cups, then looked at Karen, then looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I need to see documentation of your authority to restrict access to this area before I can take any enforcement action." That's when I stepped forward, pulling the folded documents from my jacket pocket, the same pocket where I'd been carrying them every day for a week, waiting for this exact moment. "Officer Martinez, I think there might be some confusion about who actually has authority here," I said, unfolding the state land deed with its official seal and signatures. "As of yesterday afternoon, I'm the legal owner of this property." The sound of 27 families collectively holding their breath was like the moment before a thunderclap. Karen's face went through about 6 different expressions in 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, panic, and finally a kind of desperate denial that was almost painful to watch. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice had lost its commanding tone. "This is HOA common property. The board controls all common areas." "Actually," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, including the news camera, "this was never HOA property. It belongs to the state land bank, and as of 4 p.m. yesterday, I purchased it legally and completely." I handed the deed to Officer Martinez, who studied it with the careful attention of someone who really didn't want to make a mistake on camera. "This appears to be legitimate," he said. "Sir, you're saying you own this land and the fence." "I own the land. The fence was installed without permits on state property, which means it's been illegally trespassing for the past 3 months." That's when Karen completely lost it. "You can't do this," she screamed, loud enough that dogs probably heard her 3 blocks away. "This is manipulation. This is fraud. You stole community property." "Actually," Jim Kowalski said, stepping up with his own folder of documents, "the only theft here has been your systematic embezzlement of HOA funds. $12,000 to your husband's company for non-existent landscaping projects. Would you like to explain that to Officer Martinez?" Tom, the treasurer, who had been silent through most of this, finally found his voice. "I have the financial records," he said quietly. "Karen, you need to stop talking." But Karen was beyond reason, beyond strategy, beyond any hope of maintaining dignity. You people don't understand what you're doing. Property values, community standards. You're destroying everything. Jessica Chen from Channel 7 stepped forward with her microphone. Ma'am, are you the HOA president? Can you comment on allegations of financial mismanagement? That's when I delivered the line I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks. There's no mismanagement to comment on, I said, looking directly into the camera. As the new owner of this property, I'm donating permanent public access to this lake for all community members. No fees, no restrictions, no appointments necessary. The way it was always supposed to be. The cheer that went up from 27 families echoed across the water. Kids started running toward the shoreline before their parents could stop them. Mrs. Chen was crying happy tears. Even Officer Martinez was smiling. Karen stood there, in her perfect outfit with her perfect hair, watching her little kingdom collapse in real time. The fence that was supposed to establish her control had become the symbol of her downfall. The fence comes down today, I announced. I have environmental permits, proper tools, and enough neighbors willing to help that we'll be fishing by lunchtime. And that's exactly what happened. By noon, 8 sections of decorative iron fencing were carefully stacked by the road. Karen's barriers transformed into scrap metal. The concrete footings would take longer to remove, but the path was open. The taste of victory was sweeter than I'd imagined, but the real satisfaction came from watching my kids run to the water's edge, Tyler whooping with joy as he cast his line for the first time in months. 3 months later, you'd never recognize our little corner of the world. That first Saturday after the fence came down, we had the biggest community fishing event in Willow Creek's history. Word had spread beyond our neighborhood. The Channel 7 story went viral, picked up by morning shows and social media accounts dedicated to justice serve content. Suddenly, we were the poster child for standing up to HOA tyranny. But the real changes were quieter and more meaningful than internet fame. Tyler caught his first bass from the restored shoreline on a sunny October morning, grinning so wide I thought his face might split. Emma brought 3 friends over for a lake day that turned into an impromptu neighborhood block party. The sound of children's laughter echoing across the water became our new normal, the way it was always supposed to be. I kept my promise about permanent public access, working with a local attorney to establish a conservation easement that protects the lake access in perpetuity. No future Karen can ever fence it off again. The legal paperwork tasted like freedom and smelled like victory. We restored the native plants around the shoreline, turning Karen's environmental damage into a teaching opportunity. Mrs. Chen led a committee documenting the lake's natural history, creating educational signs that explained the local ecosystem to visiting families. What started as property rights became environmental stewardship. The community transformation went deeper than just lake access. Maria's informal networks became the foundation for a completely restructured HOA. One with transparency requirements, term limits, and actual accountability to homeowners. The new bylaws include what everyone now calls the Karen rule. No single person can hold multiple board positions or serve more than 2 consecutive terms. Jim Kowalski was elected as our new president, running on a platform of boring competence and radical transparency. Board meetings went from Karen's one-woman shows to actual discussions where neighbors could ask questions without fear of retaliation. The taste of democracy in a homeowners association was surprisingly refreshing. Tom, the treasurer, finally found his backbone permanently. The financial audit he ordered revealed that Karen's husband Brad had been systematically overcharging for services while under-delivering on actual work. The HOA recovered $8,400 in settlement, which we used to fund a community improvement fund managed by residents, not board members. Karen herself? She listed her house for sale exactly 6 weeks after the fence came down. No farewell, no apology, no acknowledgement of the damage she'd caused. She moved to a gated community 3 towns over. Apparently she wanted to live somewhere with the kind of rigid control she'd tried to impose on us. Brad McKenzie stayed behind, quietly divorced Karen, and personally apologized to every family she'd harassed. Turns out, he'd been documenting her behavior for months, building his own case for their marriage counselor. Sometimes the people closest to tyrants suffer the most. The broader impact surprised everyone. State legislators contacted me about HOA reform, using our story as evidence for bills requiring financial transparency and limiting emergency powers. I testified at a hearing, sharing the podium with homeowners from 6 different communities dealing with similar abuse. Our story inspired copycat victories. A neighborhood in Austin used our research methods to discover their HOA president had been illegally charging for administrative fees. A community in Portland found out their board had been approving no-bid contracts to relatives. Knowledge is power, and power shared is democracy. But the best part? The kids. Every Saturday morning, our lake buzzes with activity. Tyler has become the neighborhood fishing instructor, teaching younger kids how to bait hooks and cast lines. Emma organized a lake conservation club that monitors water quality and organizes cleanup days. They're growing up knowing that communities can stand up to bullies and win. Mrs. Chin, now 81, sits on her folding chair by the water every weekend, watching 3 generations of families enjoy what was nearly stolen from them. This is what your grandfather wanted, she told me last month. A place where families could build memories together. I established the Community Access Fund with part of my consulting fees from helping other neighborhoods deal with HOA problems. The fund provides scholarships for local kids pursuing careers in environmental science, community planning, or public administration, because the next generation should understand both how to protect what matters and how to fight for what's right. Our annual Lake Day Festival raises money for neighborhood improvements, the kind decided by residents, not imposed by boards. Last year we funded new playground equipment and a small amphitheater for summer concerts. This year we're adding accessible dock sections so elderly and disabled neighbors can enjoy fishing too. The festival also serves another purpose. It's become a regional gathering for communities dealing with HOA abuse. Families drive in from 3 states to share strategies, swap stories, and learn from each other's victories. What started as one neighborhood's fight for justice became a movement for community empowerment. Sometimes I stand at the edge of our lake in the early morning, watching mist rise off the water while my coffee steams in the cool air, and I think about power. Real power isn't the ability to control other people. It's the ability to protect what matters, to stand up for what's right, and to build something better than what you found. Karen thought power came from fences and rules and the authority to say no, but real power comes from communities that know their rights, document everything, and refuse to be intimidated by people who mistake titles for wisdom. Every morning when I walk that path my grandfather surveyed, feeling the texture of smooth stones under my feet and breathing the clean air off the water, I remember that the best revenge isn't getting even. It's doing right by the people who matter most. So here's my challenge for you. What's your neighborhood's Karen story? Drop a comment below and share your HOA nightmare, because trust me, you're not alone, and there are more of us than there are of them. And if this story inspired you to look into your own property rights, to question your own HOA's authority, or to stand up for your own community, hit that subscribe button, because every week I'm sharing stories about regular people who refused to let petty tyrants win. Remember, they count on you not knowing your rights. Prove them wrong. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done differently? Let me know in the comments, because the best communities are the ones where neighbors support each other against anyone who tries to take away what makes a place feel like home.